I'm Lydia Moore, 35 years old, and perhaps the most painful thing I've ever carried wasn't what strangers said about me, but what my father never did. I grew up in Santa Clarita, California, in a home where the living room lights were always on, but praise for a daughter was cold and rare. My father, Thomas Moore, was the embodiment of discipline and reputation. Over the course of 39 years in the defense aerospace industry, he climbed from a design engineer to vice president of engineering at Vector Aerosystems. To him, work was a religion, technology was sacred, and my two brothers were living proof of the Moore legacy. Me, I was something else entirely. My oldest brother, Nathan, was an Air Force officer, handsome, every bit the military man, married to a nurse with two blonde-haired kids. My second brother, Eric, led the testing division at my father's company. Both of them followed the right path, the kind of men my father could proudly introduce at dinner parties. And then there was me. I loved the night. I was obsessed with stars. At 11, I cut up cardboard boxes and wired LEDs to build a model of the Apollo spacecraft. My dad asked if I'd taken supplies from the garage without asking. I didn't answer. I just wanted him to look at it and see something more than a dreamy little girl. I studied aerospace engineering at Purdue, a place my father once scoffed at as not for the overly sensitive. I juggled classes and lab jobs, ate cold sandwiches beside vibration test rigs, and clawed my way through scholarships like someone grasping for air. I graduated with honors, but at the commencement ceremony, our family seats were empty. My mom sent a text, "Proud of you." My dad, nothing. I accepted a position at Halcyon Dynamics, a commercial satellite R&D center outside Seattle. 4 years later, I was promoted to systems integration lead. By the time I was 32, I became the first woman in company history to hold a title of Director of Orbital Analysis. Yet every Thanksgiving or Christmas back home, he still raised a glass to Nathan for his new base command, or to Eric for expanding the manufacturing line. As for me, Lydia does something with machines in a lab. They say the need for parental validation fades with time. That's wrong. It doesn't fade, it calluses, like your palms after pushing on a door that never opens. Sometimes I wondered if things would have been different if I'd been born a boy. I didn't need him to fall on his knees. I just wanted, just once, for him to look me in the eye and say, "I'm proud of you." But no. I was always too different, too emotional, not cut out for real engineering. Once, I told him I'd been invited to speak at a space technology conference in San Francisco. He shrugged. Must be one of those inspirational panels. I gave a half smile. I was the keynote speaker. In recent years, I'd let the hope die down, but deep inside, a quiet corner refused to go dark. And that part of me couldn't ignore the invitation to his retirement gala, an opulent evening at the Grand Meridian Hotel, with farewell speeches, career highlights, and champagne under chandeliers. I wrestled with it for days, held the envelope over the trash more than once. But I ended up opening the drawer by my bed instead, the one where I kept an old photo, a picture I'd held onto for over 20 years, the only photo where he had truly smiled at me. Standing beside me, at the citywide science fair when I was 13. I had won first prize that day. He'd placed a hand on my shoulder. A short, awkward touch, but I remembered. He clearly had not. I slipped the photo into a thin wooden frame, carefully wrote a message on the back, and wrapped it in silver gray paper with a black ribbon. Not a large gift, but just enough to make someone pause. Throughout my life, I learned how to sit still while being overlooked. It started at silent family dinners, where my father would turn to Nathan to ask about military training in Florida, or to Eric to praise a new engine line being tested. And me? He often skipped over me like I was just another chair in the room, lifeless, not worth acknowledging. I still remember my father's 60th birthday party. It was a rainy afternoon in March, the house packed with guests, a three-tiered cake and a jazz band playing softly in the backyard. When he stood to raise a glass and thank everyone, he looked around and began naming each family member. Nathan, my eldest son, carrying on our tradition of service to the country. Applause. Eric, the one who turned my garage into an engine lab, now running the testing division. More applause. Then he paused, looked at me, and said, And Lydia? Always passionate about high-tech stuff? A soft chuckle spread from a few guests near the bar. I smiled faintly, lowered my head, and hid my face behind a glass of red wine. 3 weeks later, I stood at the podium of the National Engineering Conference in Denver, presenting my orbital analysis for a $180 million satellite project. After my session, I received an invitation from Defense Tech for a research collaboration. That night, I dined alone at my hotel, reading the email that informed me I had been nominated as one of the top female engineers under 40. No one in my family knew or cared. I once thought achievements would change everything. That if I became good enough, loud enough, my father would have no choice but to recognize me. But to him, every medal I earned was just a knockoff compared to the true Moore legacy carried by my brothers. At a Christmas dinner once, he even said, Lydia's work is impressive, sure, but engineering's a stretch for a little sister. Takes more time. I didn't argue. I simply set down my spoon and left the table. There was only one time I truly let myself feel fury. It was when my mother, Helen, called to inform me the family was organizing a Moore Legacy celebration at our old church, showcasing career milestones of the Moore men. I paused for a moment and asked, What about the women? She sighed. Lydia, you know how your father is. Don't make this harder. I hung up without saying goodbye. That day, I returned to my lab and opened a confidential file I had been preparing for the Defense Council. My hands trembled as I turned each page, not from work pressure, but because I realized something painful. The worst part wasn't being forgotten. It was being deliberately erased from the story of your own family. I used to think I didn't believe in cutting people off. I believed I was logical, capable of enduring, mature enough to let it go. But over time, I realized my silence had helped enable their disregard. I didn't need to destroy the relationship. I just needed to stop building it. Everything started to shift the night before my father's retirement party. I got a message from Haley, a distant cousin who worked as a freelance journalist in Arizona. We had only met once at our grandmother's funeral. The message contained one link, Moore Legacy, a family of aviation excellence, an article published by Vector Aero's Retired Engineers Network. I clicked it. The article ran nearly 2,000 words, listing every Moore family member who had contributed to the aerospace field. My grandfather, my father, both my brothers, even my uncle, who'd worked as a low-level tech at a tiny aircraft maintenance firm, were mentioned. I wasn't. Not a word, not a footnote, not even a period. I wasn't surprised, but it felt like every ounce of blood had been drained from me. That evening, I sat alone in my Seattle apartment. The streetlights cast pale gray stripes across my living room floor through the window. I picked up the silver-wrapped box I had prepared, the one with the black ribbon, and stared at it for a long time. It was no longer a symbol of hope. It was evidence, proof that I had existed. I arrived at LAX on Friday morning, my gray suitcase rolling softly across the cold stone floor. My head was completely clear, but there was something inside me heavier than any carry-on. The flight lasted 2.5 hours, taking me to San Antonio, where my father had chosen to host his retirement party at a 5-star hillside resort, complete with a golf course, vintage piano, and cocktail reception by the pool. I rented a compact SUV to drive to the venue. The South Texas air was dry and sharp, a stark contrast to Seattle's constant dampness. Every mile peeled back layers of memory. Wounds I thought had healed, but had only gone quiet. I checked in around 3 p.m. The young receptionist smiled and said, "You're here for Mr. Thomas Moore's party, right? He's kind of a legend around here." I nodded. My room was on the top floor, overlooking the central garden where the gala would take place the next evening. I opened my suitcase and took out the gift box I had wrapped back in Seattle. I didn't check it again. I knew exactly what was inside. A black and white photo, a small handwritten note taped to the back of a thin wooden frame, written slowly, deliberately. This gift wasn't meant to stir emotion. It was a piece of evidence, proof of something my father had refused to acknowledge for too long. I placed it on the wooden table near the window. The golden Texas sunset stretched across the box like a soft spotlight. Then I showered, put on a simple dark blue dress, light makeup, and left the hotel to have dinner with the only family member I still kept in touch with, Aunt Caroline. She was my mother's youngest sister, now living in New Braunfels, the only one who had ever dared to say to my father during a family gathering, "Tom, who do you think you are, sorting your kids like cars in a parking lot?" After that, she was quietly removed from the family group chat. We met at a small Mexican restaurant tucked in a quiet neighborhood. She was just the same, silver streaks at her temples, eyes sharp but still gentle. After a tight hug, she looked me over and said, "Lydia, you look different, not older. Your eyes. You stopped waiting." I didn't answer, I just smiled, and she understood. We talked for over an hour. When the conversation turned to the party, she narrowed her eyes. "You sure you want to go?" "I'm not saying it because I'm worried. I just know he won't change." "I know," I replied. "I'm not going for him. I'm going to end this for myself." She nodded. "Then walk in tall, Lydia. Don't lower your head for anyone in that room." I drove back in silence. The Texas sky darkened fast and fell empty. I turned on the radio but didn't play music. What I needed was the space between sounds, the kind where I could hear myself think. The next morning, I woke up at 6:30 without an alarm. My mind was strangely clear. I double-checked my dress, shoes, invitation, and the box. I retied the silver ribbon one last time, careful not to feel anything. No nerves, no anger, no hope. When I walked into the hotel lobby at 6 p.m., the party had already begun. A large welcome sign stood out front in gold lettering, honoring 39 years of legacy, Thomas More's farewell gala. Beside it was a portrait of him in his younger years, standing in front of a prototype wing his company had once produced, eyes gazing toward the sky. Inside was a sea of people, former colleagues, industry leaders, lifelong friends, and recognizable names from defense tech magazines I'd grown up reading. I saw Nathan shaking hands with a general, Eric laughing loudly by the bar. My mother was nowhere in sight, and my father, he stood surrounded by men in dark suits, animatedly recounting some past triumph. His laughter rang out, arms gesturing with practiced confidence, eyes bright as if time had never touched him. No one noticed me at first. I quietly approached the registration table, confirmed my name, and was escorted to a table near the main stage. I sat down, placed the gift box in front of me, and folded my arms. What filled me wasn't fire, it was steel. The event unfolded exactly as I had imagined, soft string music playing while guests strolled past the bar, familiar stories recycled about the glory years, and polished smiles colder than the ballroom air. I sat still at my table, eyes scanning the room, not as a participant, but as an observer. At 8 p.m. sharp, the stage lights dimmed slightly, and a middle-aged man's voice echoed through the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. We're about to begin the main address, honoring a legend in the defense aerospace field, Mr. Thomas More." A wave of applause swept the room. I heard Nathan's laugh from the front table, his hand slapping the shoulder of a man in uniform. Eric nodded with enthusiasm, as if gearing up for a magic show. My father walked up to the stage slowly, deliberately, like someone who had rehearsed each step to project dignified humility. He wore a sharp black suit, a slate gray tie, and a lapel pin marking 25 years of service to a next-gen jet propulsion program. He smiled slightly, raised the mic, and began. "It's an honor to stand here tonight among those who've walked nearly 4 decades of challenges with me. I'm not someone who expresses emotions easily, but tonight, I want to take a few minutes to acknowledge my family. I sat up straighter, fingers tightening slightly around my glass of water. I wasn't expecting anything, but I listened. My wife, Helen, the one who reminds me to eat greens and schedule doctor visits, even when I claim to be too busy. Without her, I wouldn't have lasted this long. Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. I hadn't seen my mother, but I knew she was somewhere in the shadowy rows of guests. And my two sons, Nathan and Eric. He paused. The spotlight gently found their faces, beaming with pride. Nathan, a true soldier, always at the front, unwavering in his principles, the embodiment of loyalty and honor. Eric, perhaps the only engineer I know who can dismantle a machine and rebuild it better than the original blueprint. You've both made me prouder than anything I've ever drawn or built. Thunderous applause. A whistle rang out. I clearly heard someone shout, "Bravo!" from the right side of the stage. Then he stopped. Of course, not everyone in the family chooses the same path, he smiled. Not at me, but at the crowd. Some are born to go far, in a more abstract sense. A light wave of laughter, like chairs scraping against marble, swept across the ballroom. A few eyes flicked toward me. No one said my name. They didn't have to. He continued, "To me, family is legacy, a chain of discipline, effort, and direction. Not everyone fits into that model, and that's okay. Each person has their role." Role. The word hit my chest like cold steel. I had thought I could sit through it, hear his words without feeling. I was wrong. It wasn't because he lied, it was because he told the truth, in the most ruthless way. I didn't belong. I set my glass down and rose slowly. Eyes followed me as I walked toward the stage. Not to step up, but to stop at the first stair. The silver gift box was steady in my hands. The stage lights hit the wrapping, casting a cold gleam across my face. I looked up at him. "Happy retirement, Dad," I said, my voice calm like greeting a stranger in an elevator. From someone who went too far to turn back. I extended the box. He looked down, stunned for a moment. Then he reached for it, his lips twitching like he wanted to say something, but no words came. I turned away, walking across the ballroom, through lingering perfume and the faint scent of champagne. The sounds around me faded, leaving only the echo of my footsteps on the polished stone floor. No one called after me. No objections. Just a long silence trailing behind an act that perhaps no one in that room saw coming. I didn't look back as I walked out of the ballroom. The hotel hallway stretched out like a runway under soft light. Every step away from that stage was a step away from the years I'd spent waiting. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt quiet. A kind of quiet I'd never known. Not from the absence of voices, but because, for once, I no longer had to scream to be heard. Back in my room, I locked the door and left the lights off. My navy meal dress slipped off and pooled at my feet like a shell I had just shed. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, hair still up, eyeliner sharp, but my eyes held no fire, no tears either. The phone buzzed, a message from Mom. "Leah, what are you doing?" I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, another, from Eric. "You really didn't have to do that." Then Nathan. "You always have to make everything dramatic." I switched to silent mode, slid the phone into the nightstand drawer like dropping a stone into a deep well. That night, I lay in bed and didn't sleep. I just lay there, eyes wide open, chest rising and falling, feeling every heartbeat finally free from the weight of needing to be acknowledged. The next morning, rain fell unexpectedly over Texas. The droplets on the window reminded me of radar screens I watched daily at JPL, but quieter. At 8 a.m., I wheeled my suitcase out of the room. No goodbyes. No send-offs. The receptionist handed me my car key with a professional, empty smile. "Thank you for staying at the Grand Meridian, Miss Moore." I nodded. Words were no longer necessary. I didn't drive straight to the airport. I turned down an old road into the historic part of town to a little cafe I had visited years ago after Grandma's funeral. It hadn't changed. Same faded signs, same creaky wooden chairs. I sat by the window, ordered a hot latte, and watched the rain smear across the street. Then my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then picked up. Lydia, a rough, familiar voice. My father. I said nothing. Yesterday, when you handed me that box, you knew people were watching. Was that to humiliate me? Still silent, he sighed. I haven't opened it. Then don't, I said, calmly. But I will. A pause. I just don't understand, Lydia. You have a career, recognition. Why? Why would I need you to see it? I cut in. My voice wasn't raised, but the woman at the next table glanced over. Because you were the only person who ever made me believe I wasn't enough. Silence. The photo in that box, I said, was proof that, at least once, just once, you were proud of me. I kept it for 22 years because I thought it was real. He didn't argue. I don't need an apology. I don't need you to change. I just need you to know the emptiness you left behind, I filled it, not with forgiveness, but with myself. Lydia. Goodbye, Dad. I hung up before he could say anything else. The latte cooled on the table. I drove to the airport just before noon. As the plane lifted off from San Antonio, the clouds blocked out the sun. But I didn't fear flying anymore. Not because I'm an aerospace engineer, but because I've lived long enough in emotional turbulence to know just because the sky is unclear doesn't mean there's no way through. That evening, I returned to my apartment in Seattle. Everything looked the same: succulent on the balcony, gray fabric armchair, an unfinished satellite model on the shelf. But one thing was different. Me. I opened my laptop and checked my email. A new message from the National Women in Engineering Conference. We'd be honored if Miss Moore would accept our invitation as the keynote speaker for next month's opening session. I typed my response. Simple, clear. I accept. And this time, I'll say everything. Send. Just as I predicted, he didn't open the gift box at the party. Not because he forgot, because he didn't dare. For my father, control was like breath, the armor he wore each day to avoid facing any real emotion. In front of hundreds of guests, he kept smiling, shaking hands, saying gracious things, as if the daughter who had just walked out of the ballroom had never existed. But I knew, alone in his hotel room at the end of the night, he would open that box, and he would see the photo. That photo I'd kept for 22 years in a sealed envelope, hidden deep in the bottom left drawer of my desk. It was a picture of me and him, taken at the Eisenhower Middle School Science Fair. I was 12, thick glasses, messy bun, gray hoodie, grinning wide. I stood beside the ISS space station model I'd built from toilet paper rolls, scrap wire, and hot glue. What made the photo special wasn't me, it was him. He stood just behind me, one hand on my shoulder, the other holding my first place certificate. And he was smiling. A real smile. Not the polite nod at banquets, not the camera-ready grin for the press. It was an unguarded moment, the kind of look that said I was something he never expected, but couldn't deny. I remember that day clearly. Mom made him come. He didn't want to. He sat arms crossed in the back row, checking his watch, but when they announced I'd won the district-wide prize, the whole auditorium clapped, and he, for a brief second, stood up, didn't say congratulations, just walked over, placed a hand on my shoulder, and posed for that photo with a student reporter, and never mentioned it again. Under the framed photo in the gift box, I placed a small card, just 4 words. I kept this. I'm done. I didn't write anything else, because if after all these years he still didn't understand, then no words would make him. Sunday night, I got another call from Mom. This time, I answered. I know you did the right thing yesterday, but your father? Is he okay? I cut in. In a strange way, she replied, hesitant. After everyone left, he locked himself in the study until 2 a.m. No one could get in. Then he came out with the photo, didn't say anything, just placed it on the center shelf in the living room. I said nothing. I've never seen him display anything of yours before, she added. I think, he remembered. I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the ceiling. It doesn't matter anymore, Mom. A long pause. I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner, she whispered. I know you love me, I said. But now, I need you to know, I love myself too. I didn't want to be angry at her. She was just a product of a system she was never taught to challenge. But I no longer had the strength to explain on anyone's behalf. That night, I pulled out the identical photo I had given him, the extra copy I printed at 16, and placed it back on my desk. Not to remember, but to see clearly. I had once been a girl who dared to dream, and she deserved to be seen, even if no one ever did. The next morning, as I prepared my keynote for the upcoming conference, an email popped up in the corner of my screen from thomas.moore@vecteraarrow.com. Subject, no subject. That photo, I remember that day. I just couldn't keep it, because it scared me. Scared me that if I felt proud of you, then everything I believed before was wrong. I'm not writing this to justify anything. Just to let you know, you were right and I was wrong. No signature, no closing, that was it. I read it twice. Not to confirm regret, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. I didn't reply. Because when someone has once made you believe your worth was conditional, silence sometimes is the only thing they're forced to hear. 2 days later, while I was in the lab checking data for the new satellite test, my phone buzzed. On the screen was a name I didn't expect to see again so soon. Thomas Moore. I hesitated, then picked up. Lydia. I hear silence. I could hear heavy breathing, the quiet creak of leather shifting. Then he spoke, deeper, slower. I don't know where to begin. But I think I owe you something. I leaned against the edge of the table, phone still to my ear. I didn't call to collect, I said softly. I know. But I need to say this. He paused. I opened the photo, and I remember more than you think. I closed my eyes. That day, I really was proud. So proud. But I was afraid. Afraid you wouldn't be like me. Afraid that my belief in order, discipline, and direction would be thrown off because you were different. I swallowed. Because I'm a girl? You didn't deny it. Maybe partly, but not just that. You didn't seek approval. You challenged things. You pushed against molds. Every time you succeeded, I felt threatened because I didn't understand how you did it. He took a deep breath. And instead of learning, I chose to ignore it. That was my failure. I turned toward the window. Seattle sunlight lit up my desk, reflecting off the satellite model like the glow of a distant planet. I didn't need you to admire me. I just needed you to see me, I said. Voice steady, not angry, just plain truth. But you refused, year after year. I know. And I want to tell you something honest. You remind me of your grandfather. I frowned. You mean Everett? Yes. He never acknowledged me either. Said I was blind for chasing technology, for leaving the farm to study mechanics. He told me I wasn't a real man if I couldn't plow a field. I went quiet. I swore I'd never do the same, he continued, and yet I became just like him. For the first time in my life, I heard him look into his past. No defenses, no excuses. I thought you were a complex equation, but the truth is, you were just you, and I didn't bother to learn how to be a father to a child like that. A strange feeling rose in my throat. Not tears, something lighter, as if a stone long lodged there was melting. I didn't forgive him right away, but I didn't hang up. I'll be speaking at the National Engineering Conference next month, I said. Keynote! I know, he answered, quicker than I expected. I saw the announcement. If you don't mind, I'd like to come. I didn't answer immediately. No need to go on stage. No need for anyone to know I'm there. I just want to hear you speak, for real, for the first time. I looked at the floor, then toward the door. Tickets aren't free, I said, trying to joke. I'll pay, he replied with a quiet chuckle, a sound unfamiliar but not unwelcome. After the call, I sat for a few minutes, phone still in hand, unsure how to name the feeling. It wasn't joy, and definitely not victory. It was more like a hollow space, partially filled. That night, I called Mom. You know what? I said when she picked up. I think maybe Dad really wants to understand me this time. On the other end, she was silent. Then she said, I believe that, and I'll go with him to the conference. I sank into the sofa, eyes on the ceiling. Not everything was healed, but some wounds only need to be acknowledged as real to start the process of recovery. And maybe, after years of trying to prove I was right, I could finally step into the next chapter without dragging the weight of the last war. I returned to Seattle on a soft, sunny afternoon. During the flight, I didn't check emails or open my laptop. I just sat in silence, looking down at the snow-worn mountains and the deep lakes below. Something in me had closed, not because I had forgiven, but because I no longer needed approval. 3 days later, I stood on the main stage of the National Engineering Conference, facing over 1,000 engineers, scientists, students, and those who once believed they didn't belong in this field, just because they hadn't walked through a familiar gate. I wore a charcoal gray suit, no bow tie, no jewelry, just a neat stack of printed notes in hand. Good morning, I began, my voice steady. My name is Lydia Moore, and I used to think I had to become a more palatable version of myself to stand here. Eyes looked up from every row, waiting. I once believed that to be acknowledged, I had to hide everything that made me different. My gender, my way of thinking, even how I approached problems. I paused and swept my gaze across the room. But after more than 10 years in aerospace and defense, I've learned the opposite. What makes you different is exactly why you need to be heard. No whispers, no awkward laughs, just silence. And I continued, I grew up in a family where technical achievements were only recognized if they came with a uniform or a legacy name. I used to think if I reached a high enough level of success, I would finally be accepted. I lifted my hand, not for drama, but to stop myself from slipping back into old emotions. But the truth is, if someone needs you to change in order to see your worth, then their approval was never worth anything to begin with. A soft wave of applause began. I didn't pause. 2 months ago, I gave my father a photo he once forgot. The only moment he had ever truly been proud of me. I kept that picture for 22 years, hoping he'd remember. But when I placed it in his hand at his retirement party, I was no longer waiting. I took a deep breath, not because I was emotional, but because I was speaking from my whole life. I'm not telling this story for sympathy. I'm telling it because I know many people in this room have stood where I once stood, overlooked for not following the right path, dismissed for daring to be different, excluded for not fitting the mold. I lifted my chin. But you are not a failure just because you are different. You are the proof of a kind of success the old world never understood, and sometimes walking away from a door that never opened for you is the first step to building a whole new path. This time, the applause lasted longer. I saw my mother sitting in the 4th row, eyes glistening. My father sat beside her, hands clasped tightly, looking at me, not as someone analyzing, but as someone learning how to feel again. I ended the speech with a line I wish someone had told me when I was 16. You don't need permission to be yourself, and sometimes the bravest act is to stop waiting for others to assign your worth and claim it for yourself. As I stepped off the stage, no step felt heavy. I didn't need anyone to run after me. I didn't need anyone to say, you did good. I had already said it to myself. A few days later, the speech video spread across engineering forums. It appeared in an IECA newsletter, in a STEM classroom in California, even on the homepage of a blog for women of color in science. I received hundreds of emails from people I'd never met, but who wrote that they had once felt invisible, the way I once did. A 17-year-old girl named Aubrey from Ohio wrote, "I printed your final quote and taped it to my bathroom mirror. I don't know what I'll study yet, but I do know this. I don't need anyone to validate my dreams." I replied with one line, "Build your road to a place no one thought you could reach, then invite them to watch." And in that moment, I realized I was no longer the forgotten child at a family dinner. I was a woman who had learned, step by step, to rewrite her story. With truth, with pain, and with freedom. Lydia's story is a powerful reminder that you don't need recognition from those who once dismissed you to be worthy. When you stop trying to fit into someone else's mold and start building your own definition of success, you don't just step out of the shadows, you become the light for yourself and for those silently struggling like you. True worth doesn't lie in approval. It lies in the courage to live authentically, even when no one claps. What do you think about Lydia's choice? Was she too bold or simply brave enough to step out from under her family's shadow? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and life.